This is one of those problems that makes people feel crazy. Because no matter what side you're on, you feel like you're losing. If you want stronger borders, you watch millions of people cross every year and nothing seems to change. If you want a more humane system, you watch families get torn apart and nothing seems to change. If you're somewhere in the middle, trying to be reasonable, both sides yell at you for not being angry enough. And here's the part that nobody wants to admit. The people in charge, the ones who campaign on this issue every single election cycle, are not trying to solve it. They're using it. Both sides. Because immigration isn't really a policy debate anymore. It's a weapon. And the people getting hurt aren't the ones swinging it. They're the ones standing in the middle, wondering why nobody will just fix the thing. This video is about why. Let me explain this the way a caveman would understand it. Your tribe lives near a river. On the other side of the river, there are other people. Some of them want to join your tribe. Some want to trade. Some are running from danger. Some just want food. Now, any reasonable tribe would figure out a system. Who can come in? How many? What's the process? What happens if someone sneaks in without permission? These aren't complicated questions. They're basic tribal management. Every group of humans in history has dealt with this. And most of them figured out something that worked well enough. Now imagine that instead of actually creating a system, your tribe splits into two groups. One group stands at the river screaming, "Let nobody in!" The other group stands at the river screaming, "Let everyone in!" And while they scream at each other, people keep crossing the river in total chaos. No system, no order, no rules that actually work. Just screaming. That's American immigration policy in its current form. Two sides yelling past each other while the actual problem gets worse every year. And the people who suffer most, both the immigrants and the communities dealing with the consequences, are the ones with the least say in how any of this works. Before we go any further, let's be honest about something. Immigration is genuinely complicated. It's not one issue. It's about 10 issues wearing a trench coat pretending to be one issue. There's legal immigration, the process by which people apply, wait, and enter the country through official channels. There's illegal immigration, people crossing the border without authorization. There's asylum, which is a legal right under both U.S. and international law that allows people fleeing persecution to request protection. There's visa overstays, which is actually how a large portion of undocumented people end up in the country, not by crossing a border, but by arriving legally and staying past their visa expiration. There's workforce immigration, the system that brings in skilled and seasonal workers to fill jobs the domestic labor market can't fill. And there's refugee resettlement, a separate humanitarian process entirely. Each one of these is different. Each one has different causes, different consequences, and different solutions. But in public conversation, they all get mashed together into one giant blob called immigration. And then people argue about the blob like it's a single thing. It's like arguing about food, as if pizza and poison mushrooms require the same response. A caveman would separate these problems immediately. Friendly stranger who wants to trade? Let's talk. Dangerous stranger who wants to steal? Different plan. But modern politics can't afford that kind of nuance. Because nuance doesn't fit on a yard sign. And this mashing together of separate issues is deliberate. It serves both sides. If you lump asylum seekers in with drug traffickers, you can make immigration sound like a national security emergency. If you lump labor enforcement in with family separation, you can make border security sound like cruelty. Both framings are dishonest. Both are effective, and both prevent the kind of clear, issue-by-issue thinking that would actually lead to solutions. The first casualty of the immigration debate wasn't truth, it was specificity. And without specificity, you can't fix anything. You can only yell louder. Let's start with the most visible part of the issue, the southern border. There's no way around it. The number of people crossing the U.S.-Mexico border without authorization has been enormous in recent years. We're talking about encounters in the hundreds of thousands per month at peak periods. That's a real thing. It's not made up. It's not exaggerated. People who live in border communities feel the impact directly. strained local services, overwhelmed shelters. Safety concerns. These are legitimate problems experienced by real people, and dismissing them as xenophobia is lazy and dishonest. At the same time, building a wall and expecting the problem to disappear is also not serious. People who are desperate enough to walk through deserts with their children are not going to be stopped by a physical barrier alone. They'll go over it, under it, around it, or through it. Not because they're criminals, but because the force is pushing them. Violence, poverty, collapsed governments, climate disasters are stronger than any wall. You don't walk 1,000 miles with a toddler because you want to. You do it because staying is worse. A caveman would look at this situation and ask two simple questions. Why are so many people trying to come here? And what's the plan for when they arrive? And the embarrassing truth is that American politics has spent decades arguing about the wall while barely addressing either of those questions. The causes of migration are mostly happening in other countries, which means solving them requires foreign policy, diplomacy, and long-term investment. None of those things are sexy. None of them win elections. So instead, we get arguments about barriers and slogans, and the root causes go completely untouched. And every year, more people show up at the border because the conditions that drove them there haven't changed. There's also a part of this story that gets conveniently ignored when people talk about border security: the demand side. American businesses hire undocumented workers. Millions of them. They do it because it's cheaper, because enforcement against employers has historically been almost non-existent, and because the economic incentive is enormous. If you run a construction company, or a meatpacking plant, or a large agricultural operation, undocumented labor saves you a fortune. And the penalties for getting caught, if you even get caught, are often a joke. So while politicians scream about people crossing the border, very few of them talk about the businesses on this side of the border that are effectively hanging a help wanted sign in the window. You can't solve an immigration crisis without addressing the demand for cheap labor. But addressing that would mean going after donors, business owners, and entire industries. And that's a fight nobody in Washington wants to have. Here's a part of the story that doesn't get nearly enough attention. The legal immigration system in the United States is broken. Not a little broken, profoundly, absurdly, outrageously broken. If you're a skilled worker from India applying for a green card through the employment-based system, your estimated wait time can be decades. Not years, decades. Some applicants are projected to wait over 100 years, which is longer than a human lifespan. The family-based system isn't much better. Depending on your country of origin and your relationship category, you might wait 10, 15, or 20 years to be reunited with close family members. The system is drowning in backlogs. Immigration courts have cases stacked up years into the future. Asylum seekers wait years for their hearings, living in limbo, unable to work legally in many cases, unable to plan, unable to move forward. And during that time, they're often demonized as freeloaders by people who have no idea how the process actually works. Think about this for a second. If the legal path to immigration takes 20 years, costs thousands of dollars, and offers no guarantee of success, is it really surprising that some people choose the illegal path instead? A caveman wouldn't be surprised at all. If the official entrance to the cave takes 20 winters to open, people are going to climb through the window. That's not a moral failing. That's a predictable response to a broken system. And the refusal to fix the legal system while screaming about illegal immigration is one of the great hypocrisies of the entire debate. Now let's get into the part that both sides love to distort: the economics. One side says immigrants steal jobs. The other side says immigrants do jobs nobody else wants. Both of these are oversimplifications that miss the actual picture. The reality is more complicated and more interesting. Immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, are deeply embedded in the American economy. They work in agriculture, construction, food processing, hospitality, healthcare support, and dozens of other industries. Many of these are jobs that native-born Americans don't want to do at the wages being offered. That's not an insult to American workers. It's a reflection of market dynamics. When a job is physically brutal, low-paying, and offers no benefits, the labor pool for that job shrinks. Immigrants fill the gap, and entire industries depend on them. At the same time, it's also true that high levels of immigration in specific local areas can put downward pressure on wages for low-income, native-born workers. That's not a talking point. That's basic economics. When the supply of labor increases faster than demand, wages can fall. The people most affected by this are usually the poorest Americans, often communities of color, who compete for the same entry-level jobs. Ignoring this reality doesn't make it go away. It just makes working-class people feel like nobody's listening to them. And when people feel unheard, they become vulnerable to whoever promises to listen, even if that person's solution is more about anger than answers. A caveman would understand both sides of this without any trouble. New members of the tribe help us hunt more, which is good, but if too many new hunters show up at once and there's not enough prey, the existing hunters eat less. Both of these things can be true at the same time. That kind of simple, dual-track thinking is apparently too much for modern political discourse, where everything has to be either entirely good or entirely bad. And there's another economic angle that almost never makes it into the conversation. Immigrants, including undocumented ones, pay taxes. Sales taxes, property taxes through their rent, and many use individual taxpayer identification numbers to file federal income taxes. They pay into Social Security and Medicare, systems they often can't draw from. The idea that immigrants are just taking and never contributing is factually wrong, but it's a useful myth if your goal is to keep people angry rather than informed. The economics of immigration are messy, full of trade-offs, and deeply dependent on local context, which is exactly why they deserve an honest conversation instead of a bumper sticker. Here's where we get to the heart of why nothing changes. Immigration is too valuable as a political weapon to actually solve. For one side, the fear of immigration drives voter turnout. The more chaotic the border looks, the better the footage, the more donations roll in, the more passionate the base gets. Solutions would take away the issue, and the issue is worth more than the solution. For the other side, defending immigrants drives their base. The more emotionally charged the stories of family separations and deportations, the more their voters engage. Compromise would feel like betrayal. Both sides have built their brand around their version of the immigration story, and solving the problem would require both sides to give up something. One side would have to accept a path to legal status for millions of people already living and working in the country. The other side would have to accept real enforcement measures, real border security upgrades, and real consequences for illegal entry. Comprehensive reform that includes both of these things has been proposed multiple times, and every time, it gets killed. Not because it's bad policy, but because it's bad politics. Because a compromise where both sides get something is seen as a loss for both sides in today's environment. A caveman watching this would say, both groups would rather keep fighting over the river than build a bridge, because the fight is how they keep power. And he'd be exactly right. The fight is the point. The chaos is the strategy. And the people caught in the middle, the immigrants, the border communities, the working-class Americans worried about their wages, are just collateral damage in a war that was never really about them. And pay attention to the timing. Every election season, immigration becomes the hottest topic in the country. Cameras appear at the border, politicians make visits, speeches get louder, proposals get bolder. And then the election ends, and everything goes quiet. The cameras leave, the speeches stop, the proposals die in committee. Nothing changes. The border is still overwhelmed. The backlog is still crushing. The undocumented population is still in limbo, and the cycle begins again 2 years later with the same lines, the same outrage, and the same absence of action. If that pattern doesn't tell you everything you need to know about who this issue actually serves, nothing will. Let's not forget that behind every statistic and policy argument, there are actual human beings. There are children who crossed a border and ended up in detention facilities, There are families separated by a system that processes people slower than a DMV run by one person with a broken computer. There are people who came to this country legally, played by the rules, paid their taxes, and lived here for decades, who still don't have permanent status because the system is too broken to process them. There are DACA recipients, people brought to the U.S. as children, who've grown up American in every way that matters, but still live in legal uncertainty because Congress has failed to pass a permanent solution for over 2 decades. And there are communities in Texas, Arizona, and California that are genuinely overwhelmed. Small towns that don't have the resources to handle a sudden influx of people. Cities whose shelters are full. Schools that are stretched. Hospitals that are strained. These are not abstract problems. They're lived experiences. And the people dealing with them are not racist for saying it's hard. They're just telling the truth about what's happening in their neighborhoods. A caveman would say, "You're letting strangers into the cave but not giving anyone, not the strangers or the people already inside, enough food or space? That's not kindness. That's disorganization." And he'd be right. Compassion without competence isn't compassion. It's chaos with good intentions. And the human cost isn't just physical. It's psychological. It's the anxiety of living undocumented in a country where one traffic stop could end your entire life here. It's the stress of a border agent working 16-hour shifts in impossible conditions and being called a villain by one side and a hero by the other, when really, they're just a person doing a job that the system has made nearly unworkable. It's the frustration of a legal immigrant who waited 10 years, did everything right, and watches the debate focus entirely on people who didn't, as if their patience and sacrifice don't count. Everyone in this story is paying a price, and nobody is being made whole. If we set aside the politics for 1 minute and just asked what a sensible immigration system would look like, the answer isn't that mysterious. It would have a functional legal pathway that doesn't take decades. It would have clear and enforceable rules at the border. It would process asylum cases in months, not years. It would address the economic demand for immigrant labor honestly, with visa programs that match actual workforce needs. It would invest in the conditions driving migration from Central and South America, because reducing the push factors is cheaper and more effective than trying to block millions of desperate people. It would include some kind of resolution for the millions of undocumented people already living in the country, many of whom have been here for decades, paying taxes and raising families. None of this is radical. Most of it has bipartisan support among actual voters when you poll them individually rather than asking them to pick a team. A majority of Americans support both stronger enforcement and a pathway to legal status for long-term undocumented residents. The public is way ahead of the politicians on this. But the politicians aren't listening to the public. They're listening to their donors, their media ecosystems, and their primary voters, who are the most ideologically extreme slice of the electorate. A caveman would design a better system in an afternoon. Let the good ones in through the front, guard the back, help the ones already inside, and figure out why so many are coming so you can deal with the source. It's not rocket science, it's just logic. But logic is apparently too expensive for a political system that runs on outrage. Maybe you're watching this and thinking, I don't live near a border, this doesn't affect me. But it does. Immigration affects the labor market you work in. It affects the price of the food you eat. It affects your tax dollars, which fund border operations, detention centers, court systems, and social services. It affects the cultural fabric of your community, whether you live in a big city or a small town. And it affects the political temperature of the entire country. Because immigration is one of the primary wedge issues used to keep voters divided and angry. When a problem this big goes unsolved for this long, the consequences leak into everything. Trust in government erodes. Political discourse gets more toxic. Communities that need help don't get it. People who want to contribute to the country legally can't get through the system. And everyone involved gets a little more cynical, a little more frustrated, and a little more convinced that the other side is the enemy. That erosion of shared reality might be the biggest cost of all. Because a country that can't agree on basic facts about a problem will never agree on a solution. And a country that can't solve its biggest problems eventually stops believing that solving things is possible. That's a dangerous place to be. The immigration war nobody is winning isn't a war between Americans and immigrants. It's a war between a broken system and the people trapped inside it. On every side, the immigrants waiting decades for a green card, the Border Patrol agents overwhelmed by impossible conditions, the small-town mayors watching their budgets collapse, the families in limbo, the workers competing for jobs, the kids who grew up here but have no legal certainty about their future. None of these people are winning. The only winners are the politicians and media figures who've turned this issue into a permanent source of content, donations, and power. And the most frustrating part? We know what a reasonable solution looks like. It's been proposed. It's been studied. It has majority support among actual Americans. But it can't get through a political system that values the fight more than the fix. A caveman tribe with this many problems would have held a meeting by now. They would have argued, sure, but eventually someone would have said, "We all agree the river needs a bridge. Let's stop yelling about it and build the thing." We're not even close to that moment. And until we get there, everyone keeps losing. The immigrants who just want a chance, the communities who just want stability, the workers who just want fairness, the country that just wants a system that makes sense, all of them losing, while the people in charge keep winning elections by promising to fix a problem they have every incentive to keep broken. A caveman didn't need a perfect immigration policy. He just needed a tribe that could sit around the fire and agree on one basic question: who's coming in and what's the plan? We can't even agree to have that conversation. And that's not an immigration failure. That's a civilization failure.